Hi, everyone. I am your host, Mike Hingson, and welcome once again to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. Today, once again, as we've done a few times already in the last few weeks, we have the opportunity and joy to talk with someone who I met at our recent Podapalooza number 12 event. And today we get to talk to Kathi Sohn. Kathi was at Podapalooza. Kathi has a lot of things going for her, and she'll tell us all about all of that. She had a long career with the Department of Defense, and if we ask any questions about that, then probably we'll all have to disappear. So we won't go into too much detail, or we'll have to eliminate you somehow. But in 2020, she left the career that she had with DoD and started working to promote something that her late husband, who died in 2019, worked on, the body, am I saying it right, Kathi? Body memory process?
Yes.
And she will tell us about that. So we'll get to all that. But for now, Kathi, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Michael, it is great to be here. You are such a big inspiration to me. So thank you so much for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. I really am very glad that we get to do this. Do you have a podcast?
No, I don't.
Well, see, did Podapalooza convince you to start one?
No, but there's always, I'm open to possibilities in the future.
So as I tell people, Podapalooza is a pretty neat event. You go because you're a podcaster, you want to be a podcaster, or you want to be interviewed by podcasters, which covers basically a good part of the world. And so you're in the I want to talk to podcasters, and there we are. And we got to meet Kathi and chat with Kathi, and here we are. So it's a lot of fun. And so why don't we start, if you would, by you telling us a little bit about maybe the early Kathi growing up and all that sort of stuff. That's always fun to start at the beginning, as it were.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. So I grew up not in a neighborhood where kids just played together and ride their bikes. I was in a rather along a kind of a rural road in Rhode Island, going down to the beach. If anyone has heard of Watch Hill, and westerly that area, so it was a beautiful, beautiful area. But because I didn't have a lot of again, I didn't have the neighborhood kids to play with, and I tended to be a little shy. And to myself, I spent a lot of time after I was old enough, and my mom let me, just sort of exploring the woods nearby and learning, just really kind of going within myself and thinking. And I would look at things in nature, and I would write this very deep poetry about it. So I think I was very fortunate on the one hand to have a very introspective life growing up. On the other hand, it didn't help me to work out, some of that shyness. So that's something I needed to tackle a little bit later as an adult. I had two older brothers. All three of us were adopted from very, very difficult beginnings. And again, it wasn't until I was an adult, and in fact, using the work that I'm going to talk about today, that I was able to understand some of the things that I was feeling and didn't understand growing up about myself, because some things were shrouded in mystery, and I was able to get to the bottom of it. But basically, I had a very happy childhood. My adoptive parents were just so loving and wonderful, and very, very fortunate to have had a great education and parents who told me that I could do anything that I put my mind to.
It's great when parents do that, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I was very fortunate to have parents that took that position with me when the doctor said, send him up to a home because no blind child could ever grow up to be anything, and all he'll do is be a drain on the family. And my parents said no. I was very fortunate. So it's, I definitely sympathize and resonate with that, because it's so wonderful when parents are willing to really allow children to grow and explore. And obviously parents keep an eye on us, but still, when they allow us to do that, it's great.
Yeah, I had heard you. I've heard you talk because I have your your book, Live Like a Guide Dog.
Ah,
And
yes.
I've been hearing about that story, and it reminds me, if anyone of your listeners are familiar with the Barry Caulfield and his wife, who had an extremely autistic son, and the doctors were telling them, you need to institutionalize him, that you can't, you're not going to be able to deal with that. And they said, are you kidding me? He's our son. If the best that we can do is just love him, then we're going to have him home. He's our son. We're not going to put him anywhere. And then, of course, they worked with him, actually brought him out of autism through an amazing process. But
Yeah.
yes, you're absolutely right. The parents are just, I know it seems almost cliche, but really parents are instrumental, not just taking care of the physical needs, but those emotional needs, so critical and related to what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Well, and it's unfortunate when parents don't do that and they give in to their fears and they don't let children explore. They don't let children grow. That's so unfortunate when that happens. But I'm really glad that my parents, and I'm glad your parents, allowed you to stretch and grow as well. That's a neat thing. So
Yes.
you and of course, being a reader of a variety of Stephen King books, when you talk about Rhode Island, although the Stephen King things were a little bit further north, and the woods sort of makes me think of, oh my gosh, did you ever run into Pet Cemetery? But we won't worry about that.
Fortunately not.
Yeah. That was a scary book.
Yeah.
He's a pretty creative guy, but anyway,
He is.
enjoy him. But anyway, so you went through school, you went to high school, and were a little bit shy. I kind of empathize. I was in a neighborhood. It was not as rural probably as what you grew up in. And kids did play, but I didn't really get a chance to do much playing with the kids because I didn't do baseball and sports and all that. So I did a lot more reading. I hung around where the kids were somewhat, the other kids were. But my brother was the one that really interacted with them. And I have to admit that I didn't do as much of that and was probably a little bit shy or at least hesitant as a result. But I did make some friends. And in fact, when I was 7, there was a girl named Cindy who moved into our neighborhood who had a bike. And she asked if I ever rode my bike. And I said I didn't have one. And she let me learn how to ride a bike on hers. And my parents saw that. And so then they got me a bike. And my brother had a bike. So we did a lot of bike riding after that. It was kind of fun.
Yes. I love the part of the book where your dad took a call from the neighbor who was so nonplussed about the fact that, well, did he fall off? Right? Did he run into anything? No. It's just,
then what's the problem?
I got a good laugh out of that.
Yeah. Well, and I know many blind people who when they were kids rode bikes. It's not that magical. You have to learn how to do it, but so do sighted kids. So it's the same sort of thing. So what did you do after high school? Did you go to college?
Yes. It's kind of a long story. Let's see if I can sort of summarize. I went into college in actually was in my mind pre-med. It was, the major was zoology.
Where did you go?
At University of Rhode Island.
Okay.
And
that's fair.
I had been, when I was 12, I started piano lessons, and then I had private singing lessons when I was 14. So here I found myself on a college campus where there was a fine arts center, and I had continued to, of course, develop in music, and a part of me kind of wanted to pursue becoming a sort of a music star, while the other part of me, of course, was more practical and guided by my parents about, okay, get yourself some, a more dependable career. And so here I am on this college campus and spending more time in the Fine Arts Center than the library. So my college years were a little turbulent as I was still trying to figure out really what I wanted to be. I went from pre-med into nursing, because, again, my grades weren't that great, and because of the distraction. And I even that wasn't working. The problem essentially came with me, and instead of a fine arts building, it became, playing the piano in local bars. It was just kind of trying to find my way. And my dad told me one evening, I was visiting, I was home with my parents, and I was very distraught. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. My grades aren't that great. And he said, I think I have an idea. I'll talk to you in the morning. Well, he worked for General Dynamics Electric Boat Division. So he was involved working with the Navy, building nuclear submarines.
Did he go to Groton, Connecticut?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I actually ended up working there myself briefly. And he said, the military may just be what you need. So long story short, I ended up in the Army, and for 4 years, and really did turn everything around. Then I started building that self-confidence. I finished a undergraduate degree in political science. And then when I started working for the Defense Department, and I took advantage of the benefits of them helping me with paying for graduate degrees. I got a graduate degree in conflict resolution and one from the Naval War College, where I graduated top of my class in national security studies.
Wow.
So I turned it all around. Yeah, so and you'll love this too. A little loose end that I tied up. My dad encouraged me to do this. The New York Regents, it was called Regents College, I think. University of the State of New York had a Regents College where you could challenge a nursing degree program. So with all the courses I had taken, and I went to a local hospital. They helped me to practice sterile dressing changes and all of that, giving IVs, and I passed the test. It was a weekend of clinical one-on-one with a nurse evaluator. Failure, I could not, had to be 100%, and I passed. So I also have an associate's in nursing.
Well, I wanted to, is this the time to say I wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't have any patience? Anyway, go ahead.
Yes.
I know. Oh gosh.
I'm still interested in medicine, but I figure it all comes in handy if I'm, have my kids at the doctor, and I can talk with them at a level, a little bit of a notch above just being a worried mom.
What do you think of a lot of the tendencies and the trends? And I've talked to a number of people on Unstoppable Mindset about it. A lot of the things that go on in Eastern medicine that Western medicine doesn't practice.
Well, yeah. In fact, with the body memory process, my late husband factored that into what he developed as the body map, which I can discuss when the time comes. Very, very important stuff that's just really being missed. Although there are more and more doctors who are understanding the value that the body is an energy system. Energy and information system, and they're starting to integrate that more. And
at least my opinion is they should. There is a lot more to it. It isn't all about drugs and surgery, or shouldn't be. And so it is nice to see a lot of movement toward more what many might call spiritual. But there's so much scientific evidence and anecdotal evidence that validates it, that it's good that more people are really starting to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this might be an appropriate place to talk a little bit about some of the scientific underpinnings of the work that I'd like to discuss. There is science behind it, and that when there's research that's done in, say, the pharmaceutical area, it ends up, the public will find out about it through, say, new medications. With technology, there's some breakthrough, you end up with something new for your phone. But some of the breakthroughs that were made in the 80s about the awareness of babies and children, especially babies in the womb, and also the mind-body connection, you can see it referenced in some, scientific papers, but it doesn't really often make it to the public. And it is very relevant to the public. And that's what my late husband did, was he took this research and he turned it into a practical application to people's everyday lives. One of the most really stunning discoveries back in the 70s and 80s was made by someone named Dr. Candace Pert. She wrote Molecules of Emotion. And they were trying to figure out why drugs work in the body. They figured it was sort of a lock and key, that if opiates worked in the body, they figured that there was an opiate receptor somewhere. And during the course of this, they sort of accidentally discovered that during emotional events, the neurotransmitters from the brain travel to receptors all over the body. Mm-hmm. They're actually located everywhere, in the organs, in the muscles. And Dr. Pert would make statements like deep trauma puts down deep roots in the body, and your body is your subconscious mind. So that is very strong underpinning for the body memory process, at that whole mind-body connection that we never really understood so well before.
One of our earliest podcasts, it was actually number 18, I just looked it up, was with a gentleman, Dr. Gabe Roberts. And it was also from, I think, a Podapalooza. It was the first one I attended. And he is a psychologist, and he deals with psychological things. But one of the things that he talks a lot about is people's traumas and their injuries and the things that bother them, and even the things that are good, are all actually holograms that are in your memory. And he calls them holograms because you can get to a particular one, and a hologram usually is really something that's just composed of a whole bunch of littler holograms. But what he does to help people is to work with them to find that hologram that they thought they got rid of, that they didn't really get rid of, because everything is always in your memory. And if you don't really deal with it, then it's going to sit there and continue to affect you. But what he does is he works to help people find those memory things that really need to be corrected, and then helps them to correct them. It was a fascinating interview. As I said, it's number 18 in Unstoppable Mindset. So it might be I think you might find it fun, and I think other people might find it fun to listen to. Yeah,
definitely. That sounds incredibly interesting.
He's in Kansas. I'm not sure if it's Kansas City, but he's in the Kansas area somewhere, as I recall. Well, so you did all that, and then you were working at the Department of Defense. Were you a civilian then, working essentially as a contractor, or working as an employee?
Yes, as a civilian. I it was sort of a natural, from being in the military. Then I was able to find an assignment as a civilian when I got it. I only did 4 years in the Army. Mm-hmm. I never intended it really to be a lifetime career, but it was enough time, again, for me to turn things around.
Well, that's the issue, isn't
it? Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, that's and your father. So your father was right, and obviously he cared a lot about you.
Yes,
and helped you with
that. My father did me such a great service by pointing me in that direction. I mean, my incredible career that I could not have imagined myself in if he hadn't pointed me in that direction. So I don't know what I would be doing. Hopefully, still not floundering in college somewhere.
Yeah. So is there truth to the old Jerry Lewis song, "The Navy gets the gravy and the Army gets the beans"? But anyway, it's a cute song. I listen to it every so often on my little Amazon Echo device. It's cute. Yeah. But so when did you meet your husband through all this?
Yeah. So it was 1994, and so I was pretty much square in the middle of my career, my civilian career, and there was a friend of mine that was sort of a mutual friend. She knew him as well. I was living in Maryland, and David was living in Alabama, actually, where I live now. And she kept saying, "You got to meet this guy," and kept saying to him, "You got to meet this girl." It was one of those sort of matchmaker
Yeah.
deals. And she was right. Even though the both David and I weren't really looking for someone, so when she actually dragged him to my doorstep on the 4th of July, 1994, there were some sparks. I think that we acknowledged that, but it took some time. I mean, we dated for almost 3 years.
Mm.
Uh, Before we were married, and then we were married for about 25 years
Wow. Yeah.
before I lost David, and it was really wonderful. And like all marriages,
Well,
some ups and downs,
of
but
course.
the overall theme was that we supported each other. It was really incredible. I would go to I would go to war zones every now and then.
Mm.
He would tell people, yeah, and then she came home with a flak vest and said, by the way, this is where I'm going to be going. When I came to him in, I guess it was 2017. I'm trying to remember what exactly. A little before that was 2015. The kids were still pretty young. But it was really important for me to do a job, actually in Afghanistan, that was going to take me away from home for 6 months there.
Mm.
And he said, "You know what? If it's important to you, it's important to me, and we'll make it work." And he came from a military family, so he really understood that type of.
Yeah.
He understood mission and commitment,
Right.
and yeah. So he was
I
pretty neat.
never, needless to say, got to serve in the military because they don't. When the draft was around, they wouldn't draft blind people, and later on, they wouldn't allow blind people to enlist. Although in the time of Afghanistan and Iraq, there were a few people who lost eyesight while in the military, and a few of them were allowed to continue. But they never let me do that, and I understand the prejudice, if you will, but it doesn't really stand that everyone has to be able to go into combat directly, and they could have found other jobs, but that's okay. And I
Yeah.
certainly don't hold it against the military in any way, but I do appreciate the responsibility, and I've learned enough about military life from talking to a number of people, and my father was in World War II, so starting with him, but others learning a lot about military. I appreciate what you're saying about it taught you a lot about responsibility. It taught you about commitment and so on. The closest I come to that is when I worked at Guide Dogs for the Blind. Any number of the puppy raiser families, those are the families that agree to take a guide dog puppy when they're about 9 weeks old, and they'll raise the dog, teach them basic obedience, teach them how to behave in public and so on. And one of the things that children say, young kids who want to be puppy raisers and who take on the responsibility, is they learn so much about responsibility from doing that, because when they take on the job, it means they have to do the job because the dog has to get used to somebody doing it. And they do such a wonderful job of raising these dogs who come back, and a lot of them become successful guide dogs. Not every dog does, because not every dog is really cut out to be a guide dog, but it's not military, but it is still teaching responsibility and commitment. And the young kids who do it and really catch on are great.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I can see the corollary there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's definitely some. It's pretty cool. Well, so I'm sorry, of course, you lost your husband. I lost my wife 3 years later, as you know, in 2022.
Yeah.
But tell me, so he was, for a lot of the time when you were married, was he in the military, or did he do other things?
No, he was not in the military. They would not let him in the military because when he was 14, he had a near-death experience. He had double staph pneumonia,
Oh,
and he was pronounced dead for a period of time. No respirations, no heart rate for a significant period of time. And then his dad noticed a little something on the monitor, and there he was back again. And it's one of the reasons why he had ended up actually pulling this work together. So he wanted to be he was actually in ROTC.
mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting that he got through all of that. And then they decided that they didn't want to medically clear him to go into the military. But the men in his family always became military officers. His dad was a general in the Air Force. And the closest that he got was helping with medevac
Okay.
out of like Tanzania. And I remember him telling me some stories about that. He was working as an EMT, and he managed to, through some connections, to be able to do this work, just to be somewhat a part of, the Vietnam War. But he really wanted to be a military officer, and they just wouldn't allow him. But I think that maybe God wouldn't allow him because he had a different mission. I'm pretty convinced of that.
So he became a doctor?
No, he had a couple of very advanced degrees,
Okay.
and I mean, he had a couple of doctorates, but he did not choose
Not a medical doctor.
to be a medical doctor, right, and do any type of mainstream work because what he brought in was really kind of cutting edge, and he wanted to have the freedom to be able to put the work together without somebody telling him that
Got it.
per regulations he couldn't do that.
Well, let's get to it. I know you've alluded to it, and we've kind of circled around it. So tell us about the body memory process, and tell us what he did, and all that you want to tell us about that.
Sure. So I talked a little earlier about I talked about Dr. Candace Pert and what she talked about with the mind-body connection, what she learned. And right about that time was also some research by Dr. David Chamberlain about the consciousness of babies. They didn't even realize, I mean, the birthing practices were actually rather traumatic, really, just regular birthing practices in terms of the baby coming from that warm environment into a rather cool temperatures and very bright lights. So Dr. Chamberlain did a lot of work. He wrote books like Babies Remember Birth and The Mind of Your Unborn Baby, and really brought a lot to bear about how influential that period of time in our life can be. So then to take a couple steps backwards first, we talked about David having that near-death experience. And as he was growing up, the doctors kept telling him that he was never truly going to be well. And he kind of railed against that. And he was like, well, it really brought him to wonder, okay, what truly is wellness? So back in that day, nobody was really talking about it. I think that if you look online these days, you see a lot of different theories about wellness, and it's across a spectrum, right, of not just mind, body, and spirit, but so many other things, including environmental factors. But in his quest for wellness, he did study the Far Eastern medical practices, and he studied Dr. Chamberlain's work, and such as Dr. Pert's work about the mind-body connection. And so he pulled together what he called the body memory process based upon the fact that what we believe, like the power of belief and the mind-body connection and the awareness of babies and children, that we had never really realized before about how they actually can create their reality. I mean, they what Dr. Bruce Lipton calls, if you're familiar with biology of belief, he talks about putting these programs into place that we're born with sort of the operating system, but we need the programs. And so what we observe and what we experience before we're 7 years old, largely we put together the core belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the body memory process is about, basically how this all comes about. That's sort of like the in the information part. There's a discovery part, which is, what are your childhood vows? David called them vows because just like wedding vows, they're about what we promise ourselves about how we're going to be in life based upon these decisions we make when we're very, very young. And then, so between, that mind, body, spiritual side of things, he pulled together this process where after you have discovered what your vows are, then there is a release process, how to be able to let that go. And these beliefs and these vows are actually in our cell memory, kind of like that hologram that you were talking about before. And David created a process for people to be able to then sort of like if it's a vow, then to disavow it, to be able to empty the cell memory. Because he said if the cup is full, right, you can't put anything new in. You can try with affirmations. You can try through willpower to change a habit, but if you have this energetic, aspect to yourself, these vows that are actually in your subconscious and are there, then it needs to be dealt with. That energy needs to be released in order to be able to truly create what you want in the present moment as an adult.
Hence the title of your book, You Made It Up, Now Stop Believing It.
Yes.
Yeah, I figured. I love the title. That's a great title. So what exactly is the body memory process then?
So the book goes into a lot of details about it. There is a discovery aspect to it. And that involves both subjective and objective data, if you will. It's, what am I feeling in my body? Where do I carry tension? Maybe if I have the same thing, sort of happening over and over again, like I always, maybe it's the right side of my body, where maybe I'm stubbing my right toe, or maybe whenever I have I fall down, it's always like I land on the right side and I create problems there. Or maybe I have a really tight right hip. It's like what's going on in your body. It's about what's going on in your life. I mean, how are things overall with your health, with your finances, with your relationships, like with your career, and then there's what was going on start in your very early life, starting with when you were in the womb, like what was going on with mom. And that's sort of like an investigative process that clients get to do. If mom is still around, then that she's really probably the best source of information there, but there could be other family members who are aware. And sometimes you don't get a lot, or maybe you don't even get any information from that period of time. And you need to just do a lot of this work through intuition, and being able to take a look at sample beliefs, which I have a collection of over 900 that David had gathered over the years of working with his clients, and to be able to take a look and see what resonates. Clients find that very valuable, to be able to say, oh yeah, yep, that's absolutely me, right there. Because sometimes it's difficult to access it because it's in the subconscious. I have a video that I've created to help walk people through that discovery process. And since losing David, I've done whatever I can to sort of replicate what he was able to do quite intuitively. He would be with someone for about 3.5 hours, and he could just laser beam right to what was going on based upon how they were talking about what was going in their life now, and then talking about what their childhood was like, mom, dad, how their relationship was. He would listen to how they would talk. He called it listening them, not listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're listening to someone, sometimes you're already thinking about what you want to say next to contribute to the conversation, which is fine. But when you're listening someone, you're giving them that full space. You pull in all your energy and you give them the full attention so that you can catch them saying pretty much their script. He said you could hear even their birth script, like their belief system would just sort of come out in the things that they would say, like, well, I know nobody ever really believes me, right? So, as an example. And sometimes we might say that sort of in talking, it's sort of an assumption there, that people just let that go unless there's someone who's really engaged and says, hey, wait a minute, let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what's the evidence that you have that nobody ever believes you?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people need to be able to take some of these assumptions that they just find they live their life by, and actually challenge them and say, where does that come from? And try to get back to, when that first occurred, because then thereafter, a lot of times it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it just keeps reinforcing itself.
Well, yeah, and we sell ourselves short in so many ways, and one of the things that you talked a little bit about is childhood, and so many people think, well, when you grow up, your childhood is left behind, and I gather that you're saying no, that's not true, because even from the womb, there's memory. How do we know that?
But really, I think it's, if you don't just sort of deal with whatever was going on back then it is going to sort of reach up and bite you at some point. I mean, everybody has something, even the people who say they have had the most perfect childhood, because it's not about, when I talk about childhood trauma in the book, and I talk about trauma, it's not about abuse and neglect. I mean,
Right.
Unfortunately, that happens to many. But it's about how we actually sort of traumatize ourselves because we're not yet logical. So
Mhm.
before we're 7, we're not even logical, and we're largely, in our emotional brain. And we're the center of our own universe. We're very egocentrical during those years. And so we tend to jump to the conclusion that it's about, right? It's about me. Something happened, or mom and dad are fighting. It's about me, right? Or anything that goes wrong, it's either about something I did or something I didn't do.
Yeah.
That was really big for me. Like,
Yeah.
what, it's one or the other, damned if I do, damned if I don't, kind of thing. So yeah, I would be willing to make a rather bold statement that says everyone has something that they could look at from their early life, and that because it's having some type of an impact on your adult life.
Has anyone ever used hypnosis to help somebody actually go back and either at least learn about maybe that early childhood or even pre-birth kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean,
Mhm.
so David created his work and he called it the body memory process. It's not the only game in town, right? There are other people who are doing other things that are similar. I think hypnosis, hypnotherapy can get you there as well. I think that there's also something called rebirthing. That was something that was going on. I think that came out of the 80s as well, which was about very specifically getting you back to when you were born, right? What was going on during that time. So I think that anything that works for you to get you back into that time period is good. I think what makes David's work so especially powerful is that he has a very balanced sort of mind body spirit approach, and that it's not just about, well, here's the bad news. It's about, here's the good news too, because here's a way to be able to let that go and to be able to move on. When we talk about when I talk about this topic of going back to your childhood, I always think of that scene from The Lion King where the monkey, Rafiki, bops the lion, the young lion, Simba,
Simba.
on the head, right, with the stick that says, "It doesn't matter, it's all in the past."
Yeah.
And that's true on the one hand, because we need not dwell on the past. We need to be able to get the goodness from it, learn from it.
That's the point.
And then be able to let it go. And I think that's what the body memory process does, is it takes us back to be able to do that self-examination, and then gives us a way to then be able to move on and not dwell on it, because it's not who we are. It doesn't define us, even though
Right.
If we're not aware of it, we inadvertently let it define us.
Yeah. And that's the issue. It's like I always say, and many people say in the National Federation of Blind, blindness doesn't define us. It is part of who we are, but it doesn't define us. But when we allow something specific to define us without understanding the importance of it, that's a problem. But that is something that we have control over if we choose to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
So how did David come to actually create the whole concept of the body memory process?
Well, again, I think it was his personal quest for wellness that got him, doing the investigative work that he did. He actually had other work that he was doing for a while. He did a home restoration, and he was a home builder at one point. But this work just really kept calling him, and it was, I think it was the early 80s. It was somewhere around 1984. I think that he started actually working with clients, where he had pulled together all of this information and created the discovery and then the release process for beliefs. But there was someone who actually paid for him to go through a lot of the trainings that were going on in the 80s, like LifeSpring was one of them. And there's a few others where I think there was this human potential movement back during that time. People were starting to turn inward. And then, of course, at the same time, all of this research was coming out, like Dr. Chamberlain and Dr. Pert. So I think that David is sort of like in the middle of a perfect storm to be able to create this, because he had his own personal motivation. He had access to all of the state-of-the-art research that was going on around him during that time period. And he was also very intelligent and very intuitive. So he said that when he came back from his near-death experience, he knew that there was a reason that he came back. And so I think he always had a sense of mission, that he wanted to make a contribution to the world. And then it just, over time, it just became clearer and clearer what that was.
Yeah. So have you had any direct experience with the body memory process?
Yes, I absolutely have. I used to tell David that I was his poster child because of because I had a lot of stuff that I was dealing with. I had a birth mom, and then I had an adoptive mom, and I had my own baggage that came from both. So I had many layers to work through. But I guess, there's always got to be something. David said that he would work with the needy and the greedy. He said the needy were people who ended up in some sort of crisis, because if you call it your life script, which was another word for this collection of vows that we create during early life, that your life script can either keep you in your comfort zone, or it will keep you in crisis. There's really those two avenues. When you have this unexplored stuff that's going on, right? And then the greedy are the people who life's pretty good, and they just want more. And it's all valid, it's all good, right? The different avenues that lead us to the work. For me, it really was a personal crisis that had been simmering for me through all of my life, starting when I was very, very young. I mentioned earlier that I was kind of shy, but it was really really difficult for me just through school, when I knew the answers to things. I wanted to be able to talk in front of the class, but it was so scary for me just to be the center of attention. It was just, I just think of, there's some of the stories are kind of funny in my mind about what happened, even to the point where once I got in front of the class and I was laughing at my own science fiction story that I had written, and then everybody else started laughing, and that was actually a pretty positive experience, but most of them were rather negative. But it didn't really come to a head for me until I was a manager. I worked my way up at the Defense Department, and I was in charge of an office. I needed to be able to speak to my personnel. I had staff meetings, and I had greater and greater responsibilities. I needed to lead conferences and things like that. And I became face to face with my own fears of just being in front of bigger and bigger rooms of people. And I know that, this is a common thing for people, common fear with public speaking. But for me, it was, it's just, I can't even explain on the inside how difficult it was. I managed to pull it off a lot of times, and people would compliment me, and they didn't, like, you didn't look nervous, but I realized that I had to deal with it or it was going to make me ill because of internally the turmoil I was going through. And so I did use the work and ended up discovering, I told you that my parents adopted kids from very difficult beginnings. As I discovered, again, that's another story, but a little bit later in life, I had been, basically at 6 months, I had been born, though, from an attack from my birth mom. So she tried to do a home abortion when I was only 6 months along. And so that was rather traumatic. I ended up born, I was an orphan, and I didn't have, I wasn't received into the world by a loving mom. And then I think what was piled on top of that was the fact that I was in an incubator, and I was peered at by the medical staff, probably many of whom didn't think I was going to make it. So, when you, again, based upon the work that Dr. Chamberlain did, and the idea of the connectedness, and that everything is about energy, and that there is communication that's going on, but it's at a sort of at a vibrational level, and that the infant is actually able to pick up on that. Yeah. It's not about language, right? It's not about their mental development. It's something else that, it puts these foundations within us into place, until, again, we're able to get back into that energy and be able to deal with it. So for me, it was about that judgment. Whenever I got in front of a room, I was that little baby in an incubator, and people that were, like, I don't think she's going to make it. And so that was sort of if you kind of take that and overlay that on, speaking in front of a room, what is not being able to make it, or dying, it's like, well, I kind of screw up, right? I forget what I was going to say, or, but, and again, it's not rational. I couldn't say that it was, I knew very specifically of what the turmoil was about. It was just about this intense energy that I could not define. But it was there for me. It was like I was right back in that incubator, being evaluated and fighting for my life.
So what did you do?
Well, I did the body memory process. Well, first I had my set where David and I sat down and we really explored it, and I was able to put words to it. So for me, it was they watch me to see when I'm going to die.
Mm.
And when I was able to do the body memory process, and again, it's all outlined in the book, but the specific process around that, I was able to, over time, increasingly be able to feel comfortable in front of a room. And now I do public speaking. I'm able to be on camera and take David's work, really to the world and be the face of the work. If you had said that I was going to be doing this back in those years, I would have said, "You've got to be kidding me. There's no way that I could do that." Through most of the years when I had David, I was so thankful that he was the one who stood in front of the room, right? He was the one in front of the camera. And I was very happy to support him from behind the scenes. But I think that when I made the decision to carry on his work, and I think that's when I did the final steps of the process of being able to release all of that and say, okay, again, that's in the past, right? To be able to let that go, realize it for what it was, but it's not about who I am now.
But the issue is that you recognize it, you learn from it, which is why it's important that you acknowledge it.
Yes. Yes.
And, in Live Like a Guide Dog, we talk, as you know, about self-analysis, introspection, and so on. And I wish more people would do it, and I wish people would do it more often. I'm a fan of saying that people should do it every day. You should look at at the end of the day, look at what happened today, what worked, what didn't work. And even the stuff that worked, could I do it better? Or the stuff that maybe didn't work, it's not a failure. It's a learning experience, and you should use it and treat it as that, which is why I also tell people, never use the term, I'm my own worst critic. I've learned that I'm my own best teacher, which is a whole lot more positive anyway.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing, Michael, and this is from, I think, in an interview that you were in when they were talking about what you were going through on 9/11. And, you were thinking, to saying to God, gee, we got through one tower and now there's another one coming down, and what are we facing? And that your own guidance, you heard about, just don't try to
don't worry about what you can't
don't worry about what you can't control, could worry about what you can, right?
Right.
And I think that's what this work is about, is that if we go through life and we don't know that all of this is operating below the surface, it's so easy to blame events and people and circumstances and conditions for everything. But if we're willing to take personal responsibility and go back to those early years, then we are doing something about what we can do. And then when we go forward in our adult life, we can handle those crises and we can be much more in control of ourselves. And that's where we're truly in a place of power, because we can't control all those events and conditions, but we can be, I just think, again, that's why you're so inspirational. Like, okay, you couldn't do anything about what was going on around you in New York, but you were able to be calm and trust your dog and to trust God, and that's the way we want to be in life.
Well, and that went both ways. The dog trusted me as well, and it really is a two-way trust situation. I read articles even as late as 30 years after I was born about people who became blind from the same thing that I did, retrolental hyperplasia, now called retinopathy prematurity, and I'll never understand why they changed the name. Doesn't change anything. But anyway, people sued their doctors even 30 years later and won lawsuits because medical science had started to learn. At least a couple of doctors had discovered, one specifically discovered, that giving a a child in an incubator, a premature baby, a pure oxygen environment 24 hours a day could be a problem for retinal development. And even if you gave them a little bit of regular air, the incidence of blindness went to zero. But it wasn't accepted by medical science. And so people sued and they won. And I asked my dad one day, what do you think? Should we go back and sue the doctors? And he said, and what would it accomplish?
Yeah.
And he was absolutely right. And I wasn't asking him because I was ready to go do it. I was just curious to see what he thought about it. And he thought really the same thing that I did. What would it accomplish? Even if we won, it doesn't do anything and it ruins lives because the doctors were doing the best with what they had. You couldn't prove negligence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's they were doing the best with the information they had. And that's the way we should be with ourselves too. Right. This isn't about going back and then feeling guilty or blaming your parents or, blaming yourself. We did the best that we in our own lives at every stage of our lives. We really are doing the best that we can with the information and the resources that we have.
Exactly. And that's what we should do.
Yes.
So what are some ways that people can benefit from the body memory process?
Well, again, I had mentioned that 360-degree look at your life. There's so many ways that you can benefit, because when you have this energy that you haven't discovered, these beliefs, there are words that you can put to it, and that actually plays out in your life. Sometimes in very, very limiting ways. And, if you're looking at, say, finances, if you were raised with, the root of money, the root of evil is, money is the root of evil, and you have that operating, then you're going to have a limited way that you're interacting with money. I like to talk about some of the rather innocuous ways that, relatives talk to us when we're little, and, they end up impacting us as adults and limiting us. For example, if I have an uncle who says, well, the Smiths are hard workers. We work hard for every penny. We don't make a lot, but we work really hard for every penny we make. It's like, okay, well, gee, thanks. Now, I'm going to grow up and that's in there in my subconscious. And, I believe that I have to work hard, and not only do I have to work hard, but I can't really earn money easily. Right. So maybe investments are off the table for me, investments that might yield, a lot of money. I mean, there's so many ways that this plays out in our life, and we don't even know that it's impacting us and what we do, and then what we're not doing. If we're not taking risks that could actually be good for us because of this. So people would benefit from just taking a look, because you don't know, where it could help you. But I can say that it can help you across health, across finances, relationships. That's huge about, what you observed in your parents and how they talk to each other, and then how you are in relationship as an adult. So in so many different, really those important areas of our lives, this type of work can really benefit.
There are so many things that happen to us, or that we become involved in some way or another, that are really things that we chose to have happen, maybe whether we realize it or not. And it's really all about choice. And likewise, we can choose to be successful. It may not happen exactly the way we think, but it's still a matter of choice. And that is something that is so important, I think, for people to learn about and to understand, that you can make choices, and it's all about learning. So when you make a choice, if it doesn't work out, or it doesn't work out the way you thought, and it's not a problem, or it is a problem, then you make another choice. But if we don't explore and we don't learn, we won't go anywhere.
Right. Well,
Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I hope people will go out and buy the book. Again, you made it up. Now stop believing it. I love the title. And I hope that people will get it. We put a picture of it in the show notes, so definitely go check it out. And I want to thank you for being here and spending the last hour plus with us. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, and I always like to learn. So that's why doing this podcast is so much fun. So thank you for that. And I want to thank you all for listening, wherever you are, or watching if you're on YouTube. Kathi was a little bit worried about her room isn't as neat as she maybe wanted it, so she wasn't sure whether it was going to be great to video. And I pointed out, I don't have a background or anything. Don't worry about it. The only thing I do is close my door so my cat won't come in and bother us.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah. Well, Stitch is probably out there waiting because it's getting close to one of the many times during the day that she wants to eat, and I have to pet her while she eats. So we do have our obligations in life.
Yes, we do.
But it's fun. But I want to thank you for being here. But thank you all. And please, wherever you're listening or watching, give us a 5-star review. We value it. I'd love to hear your thoughts about today and our episode. So if you would email me, I'd appreciate it. Michael, Michachaelhi at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or go to our podcast page, michaelhingson.com/podcast. Michael Hingson is MichaelHingson.com/podcast. Definitely love to get your thoughts. Kathi, how do people get a hold of you if they want to learn more? Or are you doing coaching or working with people today?
Yes. So if you go to KathiSohn.com, that's KathiSohn.com. There's a lot of information on there. You can learn more about body memory. You can get a free chapter of the book. I have a couple other free gifts on there. You can learn about my coaching programs. I have private coaching and for individuals, and I love to work with parents as well.
Well, there you go. There you go. So KathiSohn.com, and I hope people will do that. Again, we really appreciate a 5-star review. And Kathi, for you and all of you out there, if you know anyone else who ought to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset because you feel they have a story they should tell, introduce us. And if they don't think they can come on and tell the story, I'll talk with them. And oftentimes I can show people why it's important that they come on and tell their story. A lot of times people say, I don't really have anything that makes me unique or different. Well, yeah, you do. The fact that you're you. But anyway, if you know anyone who ought to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And Kathi, if you know anyone, same for you. But again, I really appreciate you being here and being a part of Unstoppable Mindset today. So thank you very much for coming.
Yes, thank you for having me here, Michael.